Monsters coming down the hall, spires cover all the walls. Serial killer is on the line, wants to know if you have the time. Aliens are landing soon, this will mean certain doom. A chainsaw sputters and comes alive, blood and death are close behind. One thing you can be certain of, the zombies just can't get enough. Just one more bite is all they want. The ghosts downstairs are on the hunt. The Shade Chronicles are keeping score, that's what all the writing's for. They record their stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Welcome to Season 3 of the Shade Chronicles, a podcast featuring short works of sci-fi and horror fiction. Here are your hosts.
Hi, this is Derek Lefford.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
The Shade Chronicles are keeping score, that's what all the writing's for. They record their stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Tapping by M.O. Stewart, Part 1. Early dawn yawned in straw-yellow striations across the gray dwindling of night. Between the light of the moon and the full brunt of day, the snow the boy trudged through sparkled pale blue. With each footfall, the top layer of ice crumpled away, and the boy dragged his boots through the fine powder beneath. It had finished snowing at some point just after midnight, and the precipitation had transmuted into a fine, freezing rain that hardened every surface it kissed. To the right of the boy trudged his father, several bucket handles gathered in each hand, the aluminum canisters clanging against his thighs with every step. Their tinny shunk reverberated through the frozen branches and birch archways around them. The boy adjusted the straps on his backpack and huffed. The gray light illuminated his breath, and he watched it in awe as it whisked away from him into nothingness. His father did the same, and as he watched it go, he smirked at the boy. It was time to tap the trees. The two worked in near silence as they fanned out through the wood, testing each maple before driving in their spigots and hanging the empty buckets beneath them. A few of the trees had to be bypassed this year. Such is life, the father would shrug before nodding his son along to the next candidate. The winter had been mild, with warm mornings and below freezing nights. That means the tapping should be good, his father said every night at dinner for the past 2 weeks. We'll have no shortage of syrup for your pancakes and maple muffins. He'd turned to the boy's mother with a wink as he spoke, reaching out to squeeze her ass as she walked by. She always swatted his hand away in good humor. Despite the early morning cold, the boy was taking off his jacket and draping it over a nearby branch to work solely in his sweater and snow pants. The work was more than enough to keep him warm, his body heat rising in thin stacks of steam from the damp bends in his arms, giving him an aura of wispy white. At last, the final tree was tapped, and father and son checked the sizable food-grade poly buckets they had lined up a week or so ago in preparation of harvest. This was the 3rd year the boy helped his father tap the trees. As a younger child, he had been taken along to gather the buckets. Whenever his father was busy with a particular tree, the boy snuck tastes of the untreated sap that had been dumped in the bin, savoring its thin sugar water taste. After each harvest, he'd watch his mother boil the sap down on the stove in a large enamel lobster pot until it was rich-smelling, woodsy and cloy, the color of ripe acorns. Once, it was the consistency of loose caramel she'd siphoned some into bottles. and let the rest cook further until it looked like liquid mahogany. This she handed into his father's oven-mitted hands while it was still in the pan, and the boy would patter after his father onto the snow-laden deck to watch him pour it in taffy-like ribbons across the soft, clean snow. He was allowed to take a small wooden mallet to it as soon as it was hard, and with giddiness he'd break it into shiny shards like splintered amber. These they'd pop into their mouths to suck on until they melted away to nothing but a smooth film of maple flavoring across their tongues. Yes, the boy had been involved from the start, but this was the third year he'd been brought out at the onset to tap. Now he was 15, and his father puffed audibly as he pushed through the 10 inches of snow from tree to tree, dragging his feet in long trenches as he went. The boy wondered how many more years they'd come out to tap the maples together like this. In a few more years, he would probably be doing all of the work alone. All set, his father grunted, taking a moment to catch his ragged breath. Once it came in slow, regular intervals, he nodded to the boy. "Time to head for home. Your ma will be waking up soon." The sun now hung low above the trees, the previously gray sky awash in yellow so pale it nearly resembled white. The inkling of pale blue radiated through the light, and the boy squinted up through the bare branches as a small flock of black-eyed juncos flew past. "There's one bucket left," his father said, fumbling through his mittens with the zipper on his jacket. "Grab that for me." The boy nodded and pushed his arms back through the damp sleeves of his tan work coat before swinging his backpack over his shoulder, noting its new lack of weight. Then he trudged to where the last bucket had been discarded in a snow heap and picked it up. As he straightened himself, the boy came face to face with the tree, the dead one that had been hollowed out and left as a strange sort of monument to time and mortality. Out of its hollowed shell grew a twisted living trunk with branches that peeled through cracks in the weathered wood, reaching out like the arms of the crucified corpus. Why not this one? The words escaped the boy's lips before he recognized what he was asking. His father, who had already begun back towards the house, halted and turned over his shoulder. What was that? The boy swallowed and placed a gloved hand against the rough bark of the cyan tree. Why not tap this one? Not the dead one, not the shell. I mean the living maple growing out of it. Why not tap it? We have one bucket left. His father considered him in cold silence. The boy knew why they didn't tap the tree. He had heard the legend first from his grandfather and then from his own father. This land belonged to their family, always had ever since the settlers first came and were awarded deeds. And this tree, by all accounts, had been dead since at least his great-great-grandfather's time, during the War of 1812. A storm had ravaged through, and that tree took the brunt of it, they guessed. It died, but remained upright. Not an unusual occurrence, especially when you have acres of trees. However, sometime in the past century, it had begun to grow another tree from somewhere inside of its hollow. A bird or squirrel must have lost a nut somewhere in a pocket of leaf litter, and that seed took and grew. In normal circumstances, the tree would have been ignored. It wasn't as if it was the sole grafted tree in the woods. The problem was that shortly before the new tree had begun growing, one of the boys living on the homestead had gone missing. The family took it as a sign that he hadn't run away, despite the note in his hand that had been left upon his pillow, and decided that something living in the woods had stolen him. Perhaps the boy was taken by something that had followed from the old world. or otherwise had existed in this land since time immemorial. Regardless, the family determined that a new tree growing from the remains of the old was the sign of a curse plaguing the land. To his family, it was all part of a covenant. One human boy in exchange for the use of the forest. The boy's father pulled his hat down around his eyebrows, fitting it over the tops of his ruddy ears. "Tap it if you want." His voice was gruff and rolled beneath the bite of cold in the air as he spoke. "You're old enough to know what you're doing." With those as his final words on the matter, the man bent his head back forward and followed their footprints toward home. The boy stood and watched after him for a spell, wondering if what his father had said was permission or a threat. He rubbed at the numbing tip of his nose and tapped the maple growing out of the dead trunk. The next morning, the pair went out to gather the sap. For every empty bucket, there were nearly 2 more containing scintillating sap, which was promptly emptied into the food-grade bins. Then the buckets were replaced, one by one, until only one bucket remained unchecked. It was that which hung on the cyan maple. The boy's father waited for him as he lifted the lid on the bucket. It was bone dry. With a shrug, the boy returned to his father, lifting his side of the poly bucket, now awkwardly laden with sap. His father only shook his head, the gleam in his eye enough to say, "I told you so." The pair returned home in the near dark, the bucket carried between them. The boy imagined with some discomfort that they must look like pallbearers. The next morning, and the next, the process repeated. Every morning passed the same for close to a week. By the 6th morning, all buckets contained sap. All but one, anyway. The boy closed the pitched lid of his bucket, the clink it made deadened by the previous night's heavy snowfall. Checking the tap, the boy scratched at his chin. The maple looked healthy enough, and all the other trees were producing. He ungloved one hand and reached forward to touch the craggy surface of the trunk when his father called out, "What's taking so long? My toes are freezing, and the cold's making my knees flare up. Come on, let's go." The boy pulled his glove back on and headed back to his father, looking over his shoulder once more at the strange tree. That night, the boy finished his homework just before midnight. He yawned as he checked the time and glanced out his window onto the back lot. The half-moon cast bright light onto the muddy-looking snow, making it appear white again, despite the dirt the plow had stirred up the last time they'd driven it over their unpaved driveway. The trees that hemmed the lot were still, dark lines disappearing into the night sky. Something darker yet moved between them, just at the edge of the boy's view. He yawned. It wasn't unusual for a rogue coyote to wander this close to the house. If it wasn't a coyote, there were plenty of other nocturnal visitors, namely black bears and lynxes or bobcats, not to mention the deer that were constantly hanging around. Once years ago, well before he was born, the boy had even heard that a mountain lion had prowled the family's woods. Climbing into bed, he tried to remember how that story ended. He couldn't decide if it had slunk back into the woods to never resurface, or if it had been shot. Comfortably settled beneath his covers, the boy turned out the light on his nightstand and fell asleep. The crunching of snow awoke him. Deer or even raccoons were the probable culprits, so the boy rolled back over and sighed. Again, though, the snow crunched, and this time it sounded closer. It was followed by a creaking that reminded the boy of the time his father and uncles had gone out deep into the woods to fell some old trees for firewood. The sound he remembered was a whip-like crack as the trunk snapped then a long, low creak as it swung down to earth. Finally, there had been the thick thump as it hit the ground. The boy sat up in bed and trained his ear to the small noises outside. He awaited the thump of a falling tree, but heard none. It was midnight when he checked the time, and he was amazed he had been so deeply asleep only moments after crawling into bed. He slipped his feet to the floor, the cold wooden planks sending a chill up through his legs. Careful to avoid the floorboards that creaked too loudly, he crept to the window, squinting through it into the darkness. There was nothing but pale snow and dark trees. As he leaned closer to the window pane, his breath fogged the glass. He wiped it away with the cuff of his shirt sleeve, and as he did, another dark shape insinuated between the trees, closer to the house this time, its feet crunching through the snow. The boy blinked and leaned forward, breathing into his hands so as not to fog the glass again. The shape was upright but hunched over at an odd angle. It moved on what appeared to be two ungulate-like hind legs. Every so often it stopped, though it was too dark for the boy to make out what it did at those moments. The shape had a rounded back, as if humped or carrying something of significant weight. The boy frowned and backed away from the window, just as a gust of wind blew the straight lines of trees into swaying chaos. The shape bounded away and disappeared into the dark woods. The boy scratched at his eye and scurried back into bed, curling up against the remainder of his body, warmth on the covers. In the morning, the boy and his father stopped halfway to the trees. Footprints not belonging to anything either could recognize staggered across the path, weaving in and out of the nearby trunks. The boy's father adjusted the knit cap on his head and sucked his teeth with an audible click. "What is it?" the boy asked. An uneasy shiver ran down his spine, and he felt the tops of his ears sting as if hot sunlight was burning down on them. The hair on the back of his neck straightened, and he looked around himself, worried that whatever thing he had seen the night before was still around. To be continued next time on the Shade Chronicles.
For 2 seasons, the Shade Chronicles podcast has introduced you to a universe of the scary, strange, weird, and fascinating. Now all of the stories from the first 2 seasons of the podcast are collected and available in a hardback book for your reading enjoyment. Newly edited and revised, experience the fright and wonder again of the stories from the Shade Chronicles, and join us on an exploration of imagination. Find your copy of Tales from the Shade Chronicles podcast on Amazon today, also available in paperback and Kindle versions.
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming.
The Legend of Urmah the Sumerian by Lawrence Trokey, Part 3. Urmah the Sumerian and Rafiq the Bard surveyed the city walls of Kish from a ridge just to the north of the city. There was a significant security presence at each gate, so they concluded they would have to enter the city by another means. After some pondering, Rafiq suggested they enter through one of the many waterways that flowed into the city from canals connecting to the nearby Euphrates River. The canals brought water to the city wall, where an archway opening let it enter the city. There did not appear to be anyone guarding these entry points. Urmah agreed, and they made their way down the slope towards the nearest canal. Upon approaching the canal, Urmah took in the size of the waterway. It was like a small river and had a current pushing the water into the city. They could easily drift to the city wall and have enough space for them to pass through the wall without having to submerge their heads. After taking a moment to secure their possessions so they did not lose them in the water, they entered the canal and floated toward the city wall. Urmah grabbed the archway, passed through just as they drifted inside the city wall. He held on to the slippery stones and eased his way to the inner part of the opening in the wall. He quickly scanned the area just past the wall. He was looking for soldiers or anyone else that would raise alarm at their appearance. Rafiq drifted over to him and also held the wall to wait for Urmah to say it was safe to proceed. Satisfied that their entry into the city went unnoticed, Urmah and Rafiq drifted to the side of the canal and exited the water. They were in the poor area of the city, and the streets were narrow and full of twists and turns. Urmah found some robes that were hanging on a clothesline, and he and Rafiq quickly donned the clothing in hopes that it would help them fit in with the residents of the city. Feeling sufficiently camouflaged, they proceeded to walk the city streets, passing markets and street vendors, metal workers, weavers, and more. Their destination was the palace at the center of the city. Leaning in close to Urmah, Rafiq asked, "How do you suppose we will gain entrance to the palace?"
"The opportunity will present itself. No need to fear, good bard,"
was all Urmah offered. As the pair neared the center of the city, the streets became broad and were paved. Chariots and horse-drawn wagons passed, and the roadway was crowded with travelers and vendors selling a multitude of wares. At last, they came upon the outer walls of the palace, the home of the king of Kish, Zukakip, and the reluctant princess betrothed to the king of Isin, Nanaya. Again, the gates of the palace were secured with many guards who scrutinized those seeking to enter its walls. The bard turned to Urmah again and asked, "What opportunity might lend itself aid to our entering the palace?"
"Patience, bard, patience,"
Urmah responded as he scanned the crowd of people near the gate. He noticed a small wagon being drawn by a donkey near the end of the line of palace seekers. In front of the wagon, there were several white-robed women, presumably priestesses of some kind. Their robes allowed little of their form to be revealed, which intrigued Urmah and sparked an idea.
"Come with me,"
Urmah ordered, and the bard followed. They slowly walked to the back of the line of palace seekers, blending in with the crowd. Urmah then began easing his way up to the back of the wagon as it sat in the line. The number of people in line was many, and it was taking some time to get permission to enter the palace. Urmah stood with his back to the back of the wagon, waiting for the bard to join him. When he did, he instructed the bard to enter the wagon and retrieve 2 of the priestess's robes. Rafiq was hesitant at first, not having much experience as a thief. But Urmah insisted, so the bard complied. Urmah watched for anyone taking notice of their efforts, but no one seemed to be aware, especially the priestesses. When the bard exited the wagon with the robes, Urmah quickly tucked them under their clothing and walked away from the wagon. Rafiq almost had to run to catch up with him. Finally, Urmah stopped by a small grove of palm trees and foliage. He waited again for the bard, and then, when he arrived, he grabbed him by the wrist and pulled him into the bushes and tall grass. After a moment, the two emerged wearing the robes of priestesses, which covered their forms quite well, while the bard was a thin man who could pass for a woman when dressed in the robes of the priestesses. Urmah's large frame was awkward and may have seemed a bit off to the casual observer. However, Urmah reasoned that if he were in a group of priestesses, his disguise would still be effective. They moved back over to the line for the palace and again approached the wagon. With Rafiq in the lead, the pair blended in with other priestesses in the front of the wagon as it came to the gate. Their forms were covered from head to toe, with only their eyes being seen from under the hoods of the robes. The guards recognized the appearance of the troop of priestesses and waved them through the gate with no hesitation. Urmah and Rafiq fell in line with the priestesses as they made their way to the temple, which was attached to the north side of the palace. Urmah said in a low voice to Rafiq next to him,
We will break away from this group when the time is right and make our way to the palace to find the princess.
The priestesses entered the temple, and one from their midst stepped forward to address the rest of the group. We must hurry ourselves to the altar room now. Since we are late in our arrival, there is no time for the typical preparations, so make haste and follow me. Sensing the moment to break away, Urmah started to move out of line, but was pushed from behind by several priestesses who were trying to go to the altar room as instructed. Rather than causing a scene and revealing himself, he and the bard went along with the group. They entered the altar room, which was filled with the smell of burning incense and scented oils. Rafiq noticed several men reclined on couches and large pillows, all who began to smile as the priestesses entered the room. The head priestess ushered in the group and had them form a line facing the men. After she completed her task, she turned to the one who appeared to be the high priest of the temple and said, Your lordship, I present the priestesses of the temple of Inanna. We are ready to serve. The high priest said, Excellent. Let us begin with that. The priestesses opened their robes to reveal their naked flesh. They let their robes fall and gather at their feet. The men in the room cheered and clapped their approval, anxious to have the ceremonial orgy begin. Rafiq was stunned. Their bodies were perfect and lovely. Their hair was adorned with colorful silks that weaved through their black long hair. Some wore small gold chains around their necks with symbols that fell down between their breasts. Others wore decorative chains around their waist that dangled above their loins and backsides. Their bodies glistened with sweat in the candle light of the altar room, and Rafiq could feel himself aroused by their appearance. He almost forgot entirely that he and Urmah had not disrobed as the others had. The priestess in charge noticed this too and glared at the pair. She clapped her hands to get their attention and waved at them impatiently to take off their robes. Before Rafiq could react, Urmah reached out and grabbed the nearest temple guard and threw him at another, knocking them both down. The naked priestesses shrieked and ran away from the commotion, their breasts and backsides jiggling as they ran, Rafiq noticed. Another temple guard lunged at Urmah with a spear, which he intercepted. He lifted the guard on the end of the spear and threw him at two more guards approaching from the other side with their swords drawn. Rafiq ducked under a nearby table just before the guard flew by, knocking over several cups of ceremonial wine, drenching the bard below. A rather large guard in his own right grasped Urmah from behind, and the two struggled, crashing into a large symbol that was used during temple ceremonies, knocking it over off its stand. The priestess in charge reached down and picked up the large mallet used to sound the symbol, and with a mighty swing, she let it fly, and it struck Urmah square in the face, knocking him unconscious. He slumped in the arms of the large guard. Rafiq, sensing the fight was over, lifted his hands in surrender as the guards approached. Urmah awoke with a searing pain between his eyes. He was laying on a cold stone floor, face down, and rolled over to his side to inspect his face with his hand. His fingers gingerly touched his wounded face and came away with blood. His eyes, swollen and bleary, looked at the blood on his fingers before he wiped his hand on his tunic. He sat up slowly and looked around. The bars of the prison were visible in the torchlight from the hallway. He could barely make out Rafiq across the hallway in his own cell. He was sitting on the floor, knees to his chest, with his arms wrapped around his legs. He rocked slowly, and a small whimper could be detected from time to time coming from the bard.
What happened?
Urmah managed to say finally. He was directing this at the bard, but another voice answered him.
You were put down by the mallet of the great symbol of Enlil, wielded by one of the temple prostitutes.
It was a female voice, and Urmah could detect the smirk that came with the comment.
A lucky strike, no doubt,
Urmah replied, trying to defend his honor.
Indeed.
The female voice responded with another smirk. He tried to find the source of the voice, and when he did, he wasn't sure if he was seeing things clearly. Maybe the blow did more damage than he thought. The woman wore chainmail armor, but it was not like any the Urmah ever saw or wore himself. The metal of the armor was high quality and polished to a fine shine. Each link seemed to sparkle in the firelight of the torch. The other odd thing about it was that there wasn't that much of it. It covered her ample bosom some, but then failed to cover her smooth and taut midsection, leaving her quite exposed in that region. Then it resumed where it hung low around her waist, leaving the tops of her curvy hips exposed. It hung down to her ankles between her smooth, strong, and long legs like a skirt or kilt would, but was slit on both sides, revealing much of her legs. She wore leather boots that started at mid-calf and were embedded with gold and silver patterns along the shank of the boots. Taken as a whole, the woman was quite stunning, with a crown of long, flowing black hair that ended midway down her back.
Who are you?
Was all Urmah managed to say in response to the sight of her.
I am Nanaya, formerly the princess of the royal family of Zukakip, king of Kish.
Rafiq stopped his slow rocking and looked up at this. The princess, he whispered.
You are the princess that was betrothed to the king of Isin, yes?
Urmah asked, pressing his face against the bars to get a better view of her.
I was until the king made a pact with that snake Asag, the high priest of the temple of Nergal, and deceived me into thinking I would be queen of Isin. When his plan came to fruition, I was detained and then thrown into prison so I would not spoil his ambitions.
Your father threw you into prison. Rafiq stood and walked toward the bars slowly, surprised at the fate of the princess.
Ha! He is a father in name alone. Yes, he sired me, but that is where his involvement in my life ends. I was raised by nursemaids, teachers, and bodyguards. Even my own mother was little engaged in my upbringing. I am no more than property to be bargained over to secure him a favorable economic opportunity. Now he fears I will expose his betrayal to the king of Isin and cause a war between the cities.
How horrible! Rafiq let slip as he gazed at the princess through the bars.
Take no pity on me. I will have my revenge instead of sitting here behind bars and sobbing like an old woman.
Rafiq coughed uncomfortably at the insult she just made at his expense.
Do you have a means to effect an escape?
Urmah asked. The pain in his face was becoming more tolerable, and the bleeding had stopped.
Means? No, but your sobbing friend gave me an idea.
The princess approached the bars of her cell and smiled. Rafiq thought she was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. Some time had passed before a prison guard came to check on his guests. He carried a bucket of stale water to quench their thirst. When he arrived at their cells, he heard a woman crying. It was the princess, he realized. She was turned away from the front of her cell, kneeling down and bent over sobbing. He pressed his face against her bars and inquired, "What is this, then, my lady?" Through tears, she choked out,
I am so cold and afraid. I am not used to being treated this way. Please help me.
"What is it you require?"
Some food, perhaps?
She turned to face him, and he was taken back by her beauty.
A blanket to keep away the cold.
"These favors you ask for, they are not easily had down here. What might you be willing to give me in return for my kindness?" A greasy smile crossed his face, and the princess almost retched at the thought of what she knew he wanted. Still, she stood up and let him get a good look at her lovely form.
I could be persuaded to show kindness in return,
she said in a suggestive way. "I would like to see a demonstration of your kindness first," the guard said, as he eagerly fumbled with the keys to her cell door. With a loud snap, he unlocked the latch, and as he was opening the door, the princess sprang into the air and slammed both of her feet into the door, which in turn crashed into the face and body of the guard, throwing him backward. He fell against the bars of Urmah's cell across the hall and found that Urmah was waiting for him. He felt Urmah's powerful hands close around his neck and squeeze the life out of him. His body slumped to the floor. The princess was up and out of her cell now. She leaned down to the fallen guard and relieved him of the keys and his sword. She unlocked Urmah's cell and then the bard's. Standing in the hall now, Urmah held out his hand for the sword and she just looked at him. After an awkward moment, Urmah cleared his throat and gestured with his hand at the sword.
You would be better served by the sword if it were in the hands of a great warrior.
It is,
she replied, and smiled. And then, with blazing speed, she made a series of thrusts, slashes, and cuts that flashed by Urmah's head and body, nearly striking him numerous times. But such was her control and skill with a blade that none of them landed. When she was finished, a small strand of Urmah's hair gently glided down his face and fell to the floor.
So you have some skill with a blade, then?
Urmah said, somewhat frustrated by the display of her prowess. Evidently, the bard said, and was amazed at the skills, beauty, and grace of the princess. She turned to exit the prison and said as she walked,
I was trained by my bodyguard, who was reluctant at first to teach the Princess of Kish the way of the sword, but I begged and would not relent until he did. He was a master swordsman, and I was lucky to be his student. He loved me like a true father, and I loved him as any daughter would.
She paused for a moment and caught a tear that rolled down her cheek. The bard noticed the display of affection and asked, "Has he passed from this realm?" She stopped and looked at him, and her face grew hard. It surprised the bard that someone so lovely could have such a harsh look. It took him a second to realize it was not for him, but another.
Prematurely. My father discovered what he had done and beheaded him for it. Yet another reason that I will split his head in two with this sword this very day.
Hold!
Urmah said in haste and grabbed her arm.
You have no chance of doing this. This place is well guarded, and you will be cut down before you reach the throne room.
Remove your hand before I do it for you,
she commanded Urmah.
The guards are no match for my swordsmanship.
Urmah gently removed his hand from her arm and responded,
Be that as it may, they still outnumber you greatly. They will slam into you like a mighty wave, and you will be overwhelmed. Do not throw away your life in rage. There will be another time for revenge.
He tried to reason with her, and judging by her expression, it worked. She sheathed the sword.
Then escape it is. Follow me,
she said, and they did as instructed. She led them further down into the bowels of the palace instead of up to the surface. They had to carry torches to light their way. The passageways were starting to get narrow and rough. Rafiq was getting quite concerned that they were going into some abyss, or perhaps to the gates of the underworld itself. Just before he was going to express his concerns, Nanaya stopped and looked back at Urmah and Rafiq.
I brought you to the depths of this place because to try to escape above would mean certain death. Urmah is correct. There are many palace guards above, and we would certainly be discovered if we went that way.
She pushed her hair back over her ear, and Rafiq forgot all about his fears.
Now we must use the palace's sewers to find our freedom.
Urmah said with determination,
Lead the way, princess.
Nanaya,
she corrected.
I am no longer the princess of Kish.
She walked a little further down the dark passageway and came to a metal door that was latched. She looked over her shoulder and said,
Steady yourselves. The way is true, but foul as well.
She opened the door, and a blast of the most putrid air washed over them. Rafiq began to retch at the smell of it. Urmah slapped him on the back and laughed.
Courage, good bard. It is only for a moment, and then we are through.
He walked behind the princess, and they found themselves on a ledge that was built over a river of the city's waste, flowing towards a light at the end of the long tunnel. It was wide enough to accommodate their feet, but the footing was slippery in spots, and they had to go slowly to avoid falling. The bard struggled to breathe as he clung to slime-covered walls of the sewage tunnel. He decided to keep his eyes fixed on the long, flowing hair of Nanaya, with his eyes occasionally drifting lower. It was the very thing that got him through to fresh air and freedom. They exited the sewers, and Urmah found more robes hanging on a clothesline nearby. These were a bit more tattered than the others, and he assumed it was for the workers who attended to the maintenance of the sewers. What they lacked in comfort and fit, they made up for in disguising their appearance as they passed through the city to the outside wall. They went to the spot where Rafiq and Urmah had hidden their possessions before entering the canal to the city. Urmah retrieved some gold coins from a saddlebag and said he would return in a moment. While waiting for Urmah, Rafiq sought to make conversation with Nanaya, so he asked, "The armor you wear, it does not seem to be traditional." It was his best effort to ask the question while trying not to say anything controversial.
It is ceremonial. It is not intended for battle. I was in the midst of preparations for my meeting with the king of Isin when my father arrested me and put me in prison.
It is quite lovely. I'm sure the king of Isin would have been pleased, Rafiq said, and then blushed. Nanaya smiled at his awkwardness. Urmah returned with horses for them. As they mounted, an alarm could be heard coming from inside the city gates.
We must make haste.
Urmah insisted.
They have discovered our escape.
With that, they rode hard and fast away from Kish, their destination being the city of Isin. To be continued next time on the Shade Chronicles.
All right, that was Tapping, the first part, and Omar, the third part. We have a lot of parts going on here.
There's a lot of parts.
A lot of parts.
You know, parts is parts. As
They are parts, but it's good because I'm liking how it's able to be split up. I don't really have a whole lot of them that have been to the point where they can be split up, but I do like whenever we do that. And as far as Tapping goes, first off, the audio was very good, and it helped in the sense of, in my mind, with kind of more of the feel of the folklore type of story that it actually is.
Yeah.
In the sense that it is kind of in a rural area.
Yes.
Well, it's in a very rural area. Mm-hmm. And you do have the father and son dynamic in the sense of it's more of kind of feeling the environment, as I always talk about,
mm-hmm.
and being able to tell the story. But you do get this hint. You get it even more in part 2, hint. But you get this hint of there being some type of folklore in the sense of what's going on in this area.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that because it kind of brings me into the whole thing and gets my interest and keeps me in there to the point that I don't really know what's going to happen, but I don't feel it's going to be good.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me give you some information here. The author of the story is M.O. Stewart, and the author gave us a little bit of bio for us to discuss. Just so you know, she was born in Wisconsin, but spent the second half of her childhood in New Hampshire. And there, she learned to love both the beauty and the haunting qualities of the expansive, woody wilderness and old history-filled places. So that could be lending it a little bit of itself
That explains a lot.
to the mythology or the vibe that you're picking up on.
Right.
I think so. Also, she currently lives in New Hampshire, which is also in a very woody place, according to her bio here, and with her husband and 3 children and a family cat, a few rabbits. And she's a multi-talented person engaging in several different pastimes and artistic endeavors. You know, definitely I think she gave us a story here that is not only rich in the kind of vibe that you're talking about, but also has that very classic ghost story-ish kind of thing going.
Right.
And it's a slow burn, for sure, but there's a great payoff.
Yeah, it does have a great payoff. And as far as the slow burn, you're correct in that. However, you can just feel the stuff in, like, the side view that this is happening.
Yeah, something's
This is going
coming.
to happen.
Yeah.
You're as innocent as the characters are. You're as innocent as the child is. But the thing is, it's still, it's like, you know it's not going to be great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
But very detailed in her descriptions of the environment that they're in. Very knowledgeable about the process of getting the sap and making it into syrup and that kind of thing. It's hard for me to place exactly what time frame this is happening, because this could be something that happened. This story could have been something that was like 100 years ago.
Right.
You know, there's really no interjection of anything that would lend itself to describe it as a modern story. Like, there's no cell phones, there's no computers, there's no TV kind of stuff. They're living a very simple life. And, you know, this procedure of tapping the trees for the syrup, it doesn't seem like they're in a business either.
No, I don't know if that still happens to the point of it's not a commercially done thing or whatever
Right.
like that. But to be honest with you, like I said, there's no boundaries of time on this in the sense of it could be 100 years ago or a day ago. And all of the things I kind of look at whenever I think of my stories and things like that is I try to look at the time
Sure,
frame that I'm
sure.
speaking to. And it's kind of nice and freeing in this sense to be able to be like, I don't care what time it is. I'm just in here up in the snow, walking
Yeah.
by the trees and dealing with whatever I deal with every day with my dad.
Yeah. So it's, kind of a timeless story in that sense.
Exactly.
So the process of going out and tapping these trees and then encountering the one tree,
Yep.
the dead tree,
The dead tree.
and having the mystique around that, the stories and the rumors and the things about what that tree is about.
Kind of creepy though that the dad's like, do what you want to do, but
Yeah,
you
that
really
is,
should. You really shouldn't do it. Do what you want to do.
Yeah, kind of a little bit of bad parroting there, Maybe he's just like, nut up, son. Do what you're gonna do, or don't.
Well, maybe again, it's just like maybe it's just the lore, and he's like, this is what I've heard and things like this. So
Yeah.
you go ahead and do what you want to do. I don't, or I do believe it. I don't know.
Yeah, if you're gonna tempt fate, go for it. So, but maybe too, in the sense that there was that story about the missing child, but it really didn't seem like that was something that this mystery or this rumor or this lore was really responsible for, because the kid left a note, and it didn't seem like it was a thing that was mystical or supernatural in his disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
But yet they still avoided that tree.
Yeah.
There was still something about that tree that wasn't right, and everybody knew it. But yet the kid was headstrong and was like, fuck it, I'm going to tap the tree.
Exactly.
I want syrup. I got to have my pancakes, So there you go.
Agreed.
So anyway, we leave at the end of part 1 with, something that happened that night when he was trying to go to bed, and he woke up in the middle of the night hearing the crunching of the snow and all that. And then the next day when they went out, he was still kind of thinking that there was something off. There's something out here. There's some presence that is in the woods that is making him uncomfortable. And of course, we'll find out what's going on in part 2.
Right.
But, any thoughts about how the story wrapped up at that point?
No, I think it was great. You got my attention. I'm looking forward to the second part. Looking forward to it because I like the story. It's going to be a good story. Not looking forward to it because I don't feel it's going to be a good ending.
Yeah, right.
For something or somebody.
Sure.
However, it is a great story. Like I said, it's like
But it's like a car accident. You got to watch.
Right.
You got to see what happened.
Yeah, you see the
when
guy
you're
drive by
driving
you really fast. You partly hope, but then partly don't hope he gets hurt. But yeah, I think that it's going to be something that is very intense, and I'm hoping, not horribly sad, but I don't really have a lot of faith in my thought there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the next story in the episode is The Legend of Urmah the Sumerian, Part 3, just because Lawrence can't shut up. So we pick up with Urmah and Rafiq making it to Kish after being determining that they were going to go ahead with the mission and retrieve the princess. So they go to Kish, and then they have to sneak in.
This story, I'm trying to find out if it's funny to me or if it's not funny to me. It's obviously funny to me. Again, I did not realize you had, this is terrible, wrote it the first time I heard the first episode.
Sure.
The audio part of it is great. This guy's lucky, Lawrence is lucky that he does the audio, so therefore he can write his stories to the whole audio bank he has. Me, I don't know what's going on with audio. But anyway, just saying. As far as this goes, this episode was great. Again, Urmah, Rafiq, and they're doing their voyage. They make it to the princess. The whole them getting to the princess part, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Are you a fan of History of the World Part 1?
I like that movie, yeah.
Okay. Are you also a fan of Star Wars?
Oh, God.
Okay.
Are you kidding?
Exactly what I thought. That's what I thought when I thought of that one episode, that one situation where they're all dressed in the robes like the princesses. So the trio is a great team, and I really like how you brought the princess in and gave her the skills and things like that. And the reason I say those things that I said about the 2 movies is because I see a lot of aspects of those kind of things.
Oh, sure.
In
yeah.
there.
Yeah. I'm borrowing from everything.
Star Wars, obviously,
Yeah.
because that's your deal. It's my deal.
Yeah.
But as far as History of the World, it just reminds me of I forgot his name. The singer, the African American guy.
Oh, yeah.
Greg.
Shit.
Yeah, him.
He was in Running Scared. He's an amazing dancer.
Yes.
Amazing dancer.
Gregory Hines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever he they're in robes and
Yeah.
but it's guys that are doing
Well,
stuff
no,
as
he
opposed
was
to women.
he was pretending to be one of the eunuchs.
The eunuchs, yeah, and then
Yes.
he got an erection. right. I forgot about that.
The little feather goes
Yeah,
ring.
yeah, that was great. So that kind of reminded me of that.
Well, yeah, and that I gotta be honest, that's probably the inspiration for what happened with the priestesses in the temple. You know, they all drop their robes and they're naked. And
Yeah.
there's an orgy about to start, and they're there to service the men in the temple. And Rafiq and Urmah are dressed in those robes as well, knowing that they're going to have to disrobe too. And obviously, they're
But then
not.
they forget Rafiq forgets because he's getting aroused by seeing the chicks, and then all of a sudden they realize they have to do it. And
Yeah.
and I don't know.
Yeah, Umar just goes into battle mode. And
the way it was explained about Umar being in the robe and you know, Umar was a handsome woman, I guess, in that robe.
he certainly was a big girl, that's for sure. Big bone.
Nothing about big girls. So yeah, I really getting to this point. I'm gonna throw some more here later. I'm gonna let you talk in a second.
Sure.
But as far as getting to the point of being in the cells and that whole thing, how that transpired and everything like that. First off, crapping all over Rafiq because he's the one that's inspiring her to cry.
Yeah.
But either way, it's very great bringing all that together and kind of developing that and getting that situation going.
Yeah, I had fun with that. And, you know, you talk about me being mean to Rafiq. Rafiq is our comedic relief in
I
this.
like Rafiq.
You
I
know,
want you
in
to
this,
pick on him, but go ahead.
even though Umar is the buffoon, you know.
He's an idiot. Yeah.
He's the braggart, boastful,
Yeah.
you know, idiot that doesn't realize he's really not as good as he thinks. But Rafiq, you know, is he takes the place of us. You know, like we're put in Rafiq's shoes and see things through Rafiq's eyes is kind of what I was intending, so that you know, because he's just a normal guy.
Yeah.
And he reacts in ways that a lot of folks would react if they were put in those situations.
We're in this world and we got to deal with this crazy guy.
Yeah, right.
And so and then we're just looking like idiots and
Yeah.
get made fun of, but that's probably what happened if we went there anyway.
For sure. So at the end of part 3, the trio is together and they're getting ready to head off to the city of Ison to confront the high priest of Nergal and hopefully avoid a major tragedy.
I like the going through the sewers. That whole situation was really
there
interesting.
You get that's Star Wars again.
Oh yeah,
you know?
exactly. It is.
Yeah.
Exactly it is. I like how you took it from the point of not taking them up, but taking them down.
Yeah.
The princess to get them out of there, and just how they're all at that point. You realize they're going to be a group and they're going to be a team
for sure.
That's going to continue to the next part or further.
Right. So we'll find out what happens to those guys in the next episode, and that concludes episode 12. And here is a little sneak peek, as a matter of fact, of episode 13 to get you guys ready for that. Thanks so much for listening. Next time on The Shade Chronicles.
Urmah, Rafiq, and Nanaya were escorted to the palace and brought into the throne room where the king of Isin, Zukakip, received them. He asked, "Who are you? What is so urgent that you request an audience with me?" Urmah began to step forward to speak, but was cut off by several guards raising spears to his chest. He raised his hands, saying,
I would only speak to your king.
Suddenly, the doors of the throne room thrust open, and more guards entered in a rush. Behind them strode Asag, dressed in his temple robes and carrying a ceremonial staff made of gold and decorated with jewels and precious stones.
Pardon my intrusion, King Zuka-Kip. I have a most urgent matter that will not wait. Today, I will relieve you of your crown and your head, as well, I suppose, and become Isin's new king.
With that, he waved his staff, and several guards, with swords drawn, approached the king. The king strode confidently towards him and said, So, Asag, you would seek my crown and my head. I fear both are harder to take than you think.
Next morning, the boy woke early and slipped into his jeans and a heavy sweatshirt. Heading out the door with his feet half inside his boots, he threw on his jacket. He had maybe 7 minutes before his father awoke. It had bothered him all through his dreams that the buckets had been dry, that he had heard crunching snow beneath his window, but had never heard the sound of footsteps approaching or receding from the house. The boy rounded the porch with alacrity, jogging as he made his way to the spot beneath his window. There, in the dingy-colored snow, was a singular white hare, deceased. Its fur glistened in the low, pale light between dusk and dawn as it lay there on its side. It curled in on itself, almost as though someone had cradled it, and set it down in the snow with the reverence of laying a sleeping child in bed. A singular brown eye stared, wide open, backward toward the wood. Sick creeped into the pit of the boy's stomach and pulled at the corners of his jaw as saliva pooled in his mouth. The sight of dead animals wasn't new, but cottontails don't turn white in the winter, and this hare hadn't been mauled to death or hit by a car. It could have been dropped by an owl or hawk, maybe, and struggled before resigning to death, crunching in the snow as it lay, half paralyzed. But the boy knew this was a reach. He swallowed and turned. A pathway of footprints led from the hare into the woods, the same prints he and his father had seen the day before. The boy followed the footsteps, anxiety numbing his nose and ears. His fingers dug into the palms of his ungloved hands, his feet shoved haphazardly into his boots. He followed the footsteps, gazing ahead until they stopped at the tree. The dead tree. Confusion muddled the boy's brain, and he wiped at a hot tear he shed in anger and bitter fear. The tales surrounding the dead tree were myths, stories his family told to keep children out of the deep woods. There was never a child who had been lost. Nothing had ever happened in these woods. The boy took a sharp inhale of the cold air and felt it scrape down his trachea and settle like pins and needles in his chest. He reached a hand for the bucket.
Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leffridge and Lawrence Trokey. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.